Next, let's try the dry brush technique, okay? And that's why I really needed my paper towel. I needed a dry paintbrush. For the dry brush technique, you're going to have a dry brush. You're going to pick up a little bit of color, and then you're going to drag it across on the paper. And as you go, your dry brush will create kind of a scratchy or faded effect on the paper. Now my brush is not as dry as it could be, even though I dried it with this. So I'm going to grab a brush I haven't used yet, and that will truly give me a nice scratch. Oh, it's so hard to see with the yellow. I made a bad color choice there. Let's try again. The lines will become broken and scratchy looking. So that's a dry brush. When you clean your brushes, don't let them sit in the water. It's really bad for the brush itself. All right. Now with alcohol, plastic wrap, and salt, we need to do a similar sort of thing to wet on wet, in that we need to have a lot of water on the paper. We need to keep the paper wet longer so that we can use these three materials. So we're going to do those next, and I'm going to have them at the ready. So here's my rubbing alcohol, and I'm using Q-tips with the rubbing alcohol. You could, yeah, I would just suggest using something like this so that you have a little more control over it. Alright, so I'm going to paint on the paper any color I want, anything that you want, and I'm just going to try to use enough water that this won't dry out too quickly on me. I really like this nice deep green, blue-green color. It's really beautiful to me. I'm just going to leave it as is. Maybe I'll thin it out a little in this space, but you can fill this space however you want, whatever looks good to you, whatever color combination you want. You just don't want it to dry out. So make sure that as you go, you add maybe a little bit of extra water on top to keep it wet, because if this dries out, then it's not really going to work the way that it needs to. Now, so there is a time factor here, but while your paint is wet, you can get your Q-tip just a little bit wet with the rubbing alcohol, and then you can take drops of the rubbing alcohol and drip it on your painting. And there we go, the way the alcohol reacts with the paint, you get an interesting effect. So I want you to try it out. Or if you wanted, you could even drag your Q-tip across the paper to create lines or designs. That's up to you. Now I apologize, I'm moving through this kind of fast here. I'm trying to keep this lesson under 10 minutes so that you can not listen to me talk the whole time, but I want to and need to show you the way to do these things. So here for plastic wrap, I want to have my plastic wrap cut and ready to go. So again, you can use your little bit of plastic bag, or I would suggest tearing it ahead of time. You really don't need very much because this is a pretty small square and you're just trying it. Now if you like this and you want to use it later on, then you'll get more plastic wrap. But here we go. Okay? So I have it ready to go. I'm going to keep it from getting all bunched up, and I'm going to paint on here maybe a couple different colors. I really do like the wet on wet technique, and I like when my colors can blend together. So I'm just gonna do something a little funky here, get a little of purple and gold mixed. It's not creating a great effect when it blends, but I do like the two colors. So again, I want a wet space to work with. Wet watercolor paint will allow for the plastic wrap to show us its real effect. Remember to dry your brush in between your color use. That'll help you keep your palette and your brushes more clean. Okay. Now, with your paper wet, you're going to lay your plastic wrap on top and just kind of bunch it up. Move it around. You can see the way the wrinkles are touching the paper, and you can bunch it up more in one area if you'd like, less in another. That's up to you. And we're going to leave it be for a minute. Okay, so just give it a moment to dry without messing with it much. I'm going to just sort of shift it out of the way here so that while that dries, we can go down here and do the salt. I've been using a really dark color so far. I am looking forward to doing something bright. Salt is one of my favorite effects to use with watercolor. You have a little less control over it sometimes because it's hard to get the salt to go exactly where you want it to go. But I really enjoy it, and I think that you might too. So, that orange, again, you don't want the paper to dry out on you, so make sure that you're keeping it hydrated. If it dries out, then the salt doesn't have anything to grab onto, and it just won't work. So I'm going to do a little bit of the wet on wet situation, a little bit of letting it run because I feel like it, and then get your salt. Salt in hand, and you're just going to sprinkle it on top of your painting. What the salt does is it absorbs the liquid. And I can see my paint got a little bit dry. I didn't do it quite fast enough, so I'm going to go back and add just a little bit more water to my orange areas so that you guys can see the actual full and true effect of the salt. So make sure you have wet paint when you sprinkle it on. If it's not wet, it won't work as well. It just doesn't have anything to grab onto. So you can use as much or as little as you'd like. And we have to, again, let it dry a little bit and then come back to it later. So that's the salt. Okay. Now with sandpaper, again, we have to put down the colors, let it dry, and then come back to it. So we're just going to slap something on the paper for now just to get the color on there. I'm going to use red this time. I'm going to use a little bit of red and orange actually. Blend the two together. Again, you do whatever colors you want for filling in these boxes. It's all experimenting, it's playing. As long as you use the proper effect, that's what I'm looking for. Alright, there we go. I like the way the red and the orange slowly blend into one another, and that's it. I'm just going to leave it be. Gotta give it some time to dry. Now, for resist, wax resist and tape resist, the word resist in art means putting something on the paper that is going to block the other material from getting to the paper. So we are going to use tape to resist the paint, and that means the tape is not going to allow the paint to get to the paper. So you can use the tape just as is, or you can tear it into thinner strips, or even interesting shapes or pieces. And the tape can go outside the box if you want, but the thing with the tape is you have to press it down so that it has a really good stick to it. You don't want the tape to be peeling up, because if water can get underneath the tape, then your paint can get underneath the tape. So you can just lay a little bit of tape on there, make whatever you would like, whatever kind of little design. I'm actually going to make, I could use little pointy bits of tape and create a star, or I could use bits that went around and created more of a rounded circular shape. It's totally up to you. So take some time to mess around with the tape and create a design you're interested in, because that'll make this way more fun. I am, like I said, trying not to make this take too long for the video. So I've got all the tape laid on there. I'm giving it a good press to make sure that water won't get underneath it. And here I go. I paint on top. I'm going to use red again because I feel like it. I'm just going to paint around and fill the space. I think I'm also going to use a little bit of black just because I haven't yet. Clean water to start my black out. If you go outside of the lines on the box, that's fine. It's not a big deal. You just don't want it to run into the box next to it, because if it runs into the box next to it and the box next to it is still wet, then you wind up with the blending wet on wet effect. So just be careful. You also don't want your paint to go outside the box and cover up the label that you've created. So do be careful to keep your labels around. Shucks, I put my black in the wrong cup. Contaminated my nice clean water. Shucks. Alright. So, there we go. Let it dry. Now with wax resist, you can draw on the paper with wax, and if you have enough pressure, it will give you the desired effect. So use a crayon or a birthday candle or some sort of candle, any sort of wax, and draw some designs. You don't want to press too light. Now I will say, when I'm using crayons, I really like using a white crayon, because then it's sort of like, I don't know, it just makes me feel like it's more magical later on, because you can't even see necessarily what you've created and you have to kind of remember what you drew on. And if you can't remember, then it's a total surprise. But you do have to put a decent amount of pressure on the paper in order for it to work. You could write your name, do some numbers or some letters. That could be really fun with wax resist. So, anyway, now we've got what we need. Let us do our final painting here. I think I'm going to use black again, just because the black will contrast really nicely. And then sometimes when you're painting with resist and wax resist, the paint still soaks in. You can see there on my star. So for example, my star, how part of my yellow star isn't resisting as well as the rest. Maybe I didn't press quite as hard there with the crayon as I should have. But I could also use a little bit of paper towel and just gently lift off some of that pigment while the paint is still wet. Okay. So there we go. That is resist. Wax resist and tape resist. Then this is still drying, so I'm going to let it be for another moment, but while I wait for that to dry, I'm going to pull off my plastic wrap, and it's kind of hard to see at a distance, but the plastic wrap gives kind of a crinkly effect, and maybe mine wasn't as great as it could have been, but it's experimenting, and I have 3 extra boxes. With these 3 extra boxes, I get to try things again, so I'm definitely going to try the plastic wrap again. With the salt, now that that is dried, you can just run your, oh, mine's not quite dry enough. Once it's dry, basically you run your finger over it and flake all the salt off, and then it gives you an interesting thing. I'm going to leave that alone for now because it's not really dry yet. sandpaper. I'm going to wait a bit on that. I can probably peel my tape off here. Gently peel the tape. Gently so your paper doesn't tear. Mine tore a little bit. I was going too fast. Okay, now again, I've rushed this. I've gone really quickly because I'm trying to get to all of it and trying not to take too long, and I've already got a way longer video than I had wanted. So wait for your salt to dry, then rub your hand over it and flake it all off the paper, and it gives you an interesting effect. Now with the sandpaper, take the sandpaper square, and when this is dried a little bit, you just sort of scratch into it. Mine's too wet still, so I don't want to rush it. I'm going to come back to Okay, so once your sandpaper area has dried a little bit more and it's not wet and cold to the touch, use your sandpaper and just drag it slightly across the paper. You can create some scratch marks and even get down to the white paper gently. It takes a little bit of work, but really you can create design in it. Scratching through a material that's been laid down on a surface is called sgraffito, and we use the term sgraffito in lots of different art areas, but you could just call it sandpaper or scratching for now. That's fine for studio art. I'll know what you're talking about. So I'm going to try scratch a little design into it. You could scratch letters again, or like a shape if you wanted to try that. Takes a little bit of repetition, a little more effort to create a design that you're interested in, but it's an interesting effect. Sandpaper, scratching, sgraffito. And then with salt, again, once it's more dry to the touch and a little less cold, you can just sort of rub your fingers over it to flake the salt away, just gently. And then give your paper a little tap. Get rid of that salt, and you can see the way that the individual, trying to get it to focus here, the little grains of salt kind of soak up part of the pigment, and then they leave it a little spotty in other areas. So this salting didn't go as well for me as I would have liked. Here are a couple examples of salting that turned out really well for me in the past. So that's black and red with salt sprinkled on top of it. There's one orange and red with I dragged a line of red back and forth through, and then I sprinkled salt on top, and it really gives an interesting and different effect. Salting is one of my favorite techniques to use. So anyway, that's all of the different techniques, and if you have these extra spaces here, you can do what you want in them. Maybe you want to try another one again. I think I said that I wanted to try my plastic wrap again. I'm definitely going to try my salting again. It's just an extra space for you to get better at these techniques, because you will take the techniques that you like best, and in the end we will apply them to a larger assignment. Now, another material you can use is this worksheet that I sent along with you. It says pen and ink watercolor, optional. The assignment itself is not optional, but using these techniques is optional. So if you wanted to, you could, in one of these boxes, use ink pen, whatever color of ink pen you want, and mess around with some of these techniques. Now, we've done hatching, cross-hatching before, we've done stippling, and you can try drawing on the page and then painting watercolor on top of it. You can get some really fun effects with ink and watercolor. In fact, ink and watercolor together is a very, very interesting and really a whole realm of art creation. So if you want to try these things, this is a great resource. Give it a go. Ink pen and watercolor go really well together. Notice how none of these blended or smeared. If you were using markers, that wouldn't work. Sharpie is permanent, so that one should be fine. And ink, really any sort of ink that's more permanent will go really well with watercolor. So it's an option. You don't have to use it, but it's an option. You do have to. I'm looking for everybody to have 8 of these different techniques, 8 different boxes, and then you want to keep them. Now your other watercolor paper, you need the other 2 pages for our assignment tomorrow, so you want to keep these all on 1 page. You do not want to spill out onto 2 or 3 pages with this. You have to keep it all on 1, unless you're working in your sketchbook, and if you're working in your sketchbook you have all the paper you want there. So